Good evening, everyone. Oh, we love Rhode Island. When I see my friends from my hometown walk in the room. Is everyone ready? Okay. We got a thumbs up in the back. Welcome to the University of Rhode Island. Hi to everyone at home. This event is being live streamed and recorded for future viewing pleasure. My name is Kate Venturini Hardesty. I am a staff person here at the university. I work for Cooperative Extension, which I'll tell you about in a minute. This is our 7th annual Plugged into Energy Research lecture series. We're very proud of that. Every year we pull together this series really to highlight some of the latest and greatest research around specific energy topics, and we choose topics based on conversations we have throughout the year with people, our partners in the industry and in government. And so this year, based on the number of folks who registered for tonight's lecture, I think we picked a great topic to share with everyone. So I really want to thank everyone who's here watching from the comfort of their home, and all of you who actually came in person. This is one of the first extension events we've had back in living color, so thank you very much for coming out. So, in case anyone wants to make sure they're in the right place, we are going to be talking about Rhode Island's new transportation system this evening. And you are at the University of Rhode Island in our beautiful, brand new Welcome Center here, and we call this the Hope Room. So myself and my colleague here, Kaylin and Kurta, who you'll hear from in a moment, work for Cooperative Extension. How many in the room are familiar with what Cooperative Extension is or does? All the energy fellows raise their hand. Good job. So I will tell you anyway that URI is Rhode Island's land grant institution. That means that we have a three-pronged mission. We are not only responsible for teaching students and conducting research, we're also responsible for bringing science out to communities, out to individuals to help them live better lives and be prosperous. And also much of the work we do centers on protecting the natural environment. So tonight's lecture falls within our energy literacy strategic area of focus, which up here says energy efficiency, conservation, and renewables. We are very keenly aware of how important it is for this information to get out to people who aren't able to come here to the campus. And so I'm really grateful that we're able to live stream this on YouTube and then put it up on our YouTube channel so that people everywhere can watch it. You're in for a treat with the speakers we have tonight. We've been working with them for a couple months to make sure this is a really great event. And if anyone likes things like growing their own food, or supporting pollinators, or protecting water quality, or saving forests and farmland, we probably have programs for you in Extension. So make sure, please, that you sign in at the front, because then that means that Kaylin and I can send you emails once you go back home about all of our wonderful programs, and you can share that information with your friends and family. Deal? Okay. So just a couple housekeeping items. We, in Extension, disseminate science-based information, and one of the things that sets us apart from other people who do that is that we measure the effectiveness of the information we give you on how you behave. I'm happy to talk to anyone about that if you want to know more, but one of the ways we do that is we send surveys out. It's a 3-question survey, right? And it's going to ask you if you learned anything new. And what, if anything, you're going to do differently as a result of what you learned tonight. So you'll get that in an email tomorrow-ish. So please take a moment, if you would. Even everyone at home, thank you in advance for filling out our survey. And then, as I mentioned, this is being recorded, and we do have an Extension YouTube channel that you can go to that has, thanks to COVID, hundreds of videos of webinars and other programs that we did and recorded while we were all home. So thank you, pandemic, for teaching us how to do things in a hybrid fashion, because we didn't do that before. So I am going to introduce my colleague, Kurt Bayen, who is a 2022 URI Energy Fellow. He's actually the first John Feinstein Energy Fellow. John Feinstein is the founder of VHB and has agreed to support 5 years of energy fellowships through a gift, which is really wonderful. And so Kurt is working with Kaylin and I directly on our energy literacy programs, and he is the driving force behind this program tonight and 2 others that we'll tell you about later. So Kurta grew up in Liberia, West Africa. He graduated from Monrovia College and Industrial Training School and came to the United States in 2016. He graduated from CCRI with an associate's degree in general studies and then transferred here to URI. He is technically in his final semester here, earning a Bachelor of Science in Environmental and Natural Resource Economics with a concentration in green markets and sustainability. He's also, I believe, successfully earned an Energy Economics and Policy certificate. And as I mentioned, he's a 2022 Energy Fellow. So he is a member, and I always get these wrong, the Pi Sigma Pi National Honor Fraternity. And after graduation, he wants to work in the renewable energy sector. And it's been a real privilege to work with him. He's going to say a few words and introduce our moderator. If anyone needs anything, Kaylin and I are here for you. Come on up, Kurtza.
Hi, everyone. Like Kaylin said, like Kate said, I'm Kurt Bayen, and I'm actually honored and excited to be part of this amazing team that organizes this event. Yeah, so as I was saying, I'm honored to be here today, and this time I want to acknowledge the sponsors of the 2022 Energy Fellows Program, Vinia Wayne and RAS Engineering. And if anybody in here also interested in sponsoring our program, you can contact Kate after here. And then I'll move to introduce our moderator of the night, Hem Wester. Heng is the Rhode Island director of the Arcadia Center, and he works to implement energy and research initiatives in clean transportation, heating, and electricity generation in Rhode Island and across the Northeast. He currently serves on this Rhode Island State Power Sector Transformation Advisory Group, including its electric transportation, energy storage, and grid modernization subcommittees. He was selected by Governor Raimondo to serve on the state's Mobility Innovation Working Group, developing the Clean Transportation and Mobility Innovation Reports. Previously, Heng serves as the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Washington Road and Transportation Builders Association and the Managing Director of the Public-Private Partnerships Division of the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. Without further ado, I would now like to call on Heng Wester for the rest of the night.
Thank you, Carter. Thank you, everybody. This is a pretty exciting night. We've got a great panel ahead of me and of you, and so I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about the work that I do, but Acadia Center is a regional clean energy nonprofit. We do research and advocacy work, so a lot of heavy data analysis and then going and implementing policies throughout the states that we work in. And you know, there's a lot going on in the clean energy space, not only with transportation, but with the evolution of the regional grid, of getting to 100% renewables, of decarbonizing the heating sector. And the best way to characterize the work that we do at Acadia Center is connecting all of those things together and recognizing how doing things in one sector, like advancing clean transportation and electrification of vehicles, like we're going to talk about tonight, impacts the grid and the things that we need to do to prepare for that over there, and also the regional climate, the global climate and regional energy markets and how that's going to be affected. And we do that throughout the entire economy and across the region. So that's a little bit of a flavor of what we do, but the real focus tonight is on some of the developments that are going on right here in Rhode Island. We are a clean energy leader, as I'm sure you know. This is a great program. The Energy Fellows is a great program, and I myself am a graduate of the Cooperative Extension, but through the Master Gardener program. So, I don't know that I know how to plant things all that well, but I definitely learned how to. It's just I've probably forgotten more than I should have. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the night, John Paul Verducci, who is here from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. John Paul is the Chief Economic and Policy Analyst over at RIDOT, and he holds a bachelor's degree in Business Administration from Bryant and a master's degree in Public Administration from right here at URI. So John Paul has over 15 years of experience in state service, serving as a fiscal and policy analyst, financial officer, and program manager. And he spent his first half of the career in the legislative branch, where a lot of these programs get sort of underway and approved, and the funding that comes through in the state budget. And I know he has a big announcement to make tonight on that front. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to John Paul.
All right, thank you so much, Hank. Appreciate it. Big thanks to the university, the organizers from the Cooperative Extension. Kate, thanks for torturing me, looking for my slides. And I'd also like to thank all of you for coming out tonight and those of you watching at home. So I'm JP Verducci from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. I'm currently leading the state efforts for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Wanted to make sure I got that right. That is the NEVI program. You'll hear that acronym. The program is designed to ease range anxiety for drivers as they travel throughout the country, and do this by establishing a connected network of charging stations. So that is the program we'll be talking about tonight. A little bit of background on the program. We've got a lot of information on the slides, but I'll just hit the highlights for you. The funding for electric vehicle infrastructure was made available through the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. To administer that program, the federal government created a new department with experts from two sides, transportation and energy, and that is actually called the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. So what we're seeing here for the first time is a new office being created that really pairs these two missions together. This group works closely with the Federal Highway Administration, who is actually the entity funding us. Similar to other federal funding, this money is 80% federal, and it's matched by 20% local, which can be the state's budget, or it can be other entities as well. We'll get into that. And these sources could include cities, towns, private businesses, and hopefully even the energy providers. So the funding is formula-based, and Rhode Island stands to receive $23 million. And that's about $3.8 million for the upcoming federal fiscal year. And as Hank alluded to, I will say we just received word today that the grant has been approved, and we will receive the $23 million over the next 5 years. Very exciting, yes. Thank you very much. So, what is RIDOT's role in this process? You know RIDOT for many things, and in this case, RIDOT's role is going to be to coordinate. First off is to carry out the program mission. We do this in concert with our state partners, the Department of Environmental Management and the Office of Energy Resources. When undertaking this, we had to better understand current and future state of electric vehicle infrastructure, and the department is responsible to identify and outreach stakeholders throughout the state. As well as our neighboring states. You have to keep in mind with this program, it is geared towards national connectivity. And so RIDOT is responsible for the final plan submission, which not as exciting now to hear. We did complete a couple days ahead of time back in July. So now that we have received approval for funding, we'll be responsible for facilitating that and getting it out the door. This here, just more of a list for you. Just to give you an idea of what the elements in the NEVI plan include. Obviously, it's a main vision and the goals need to be laid out. And before we get too far with how we developed the plan, I just wanted you to understand the elements that the joint office stressed that we should emphasize in our individual plans. I'll touch on some of these in more detail as we go on, but I just wanted you to see the breadth of the program. It's not really just saying provide X amount of chargers in Y amount of space. It really is a very wide program. It goes all the way to the overarching electrification goals of the state, down to the workforce it'll take to get that out. Here's something we are pretty proud of at the department. We did not have a lot of time to work with this. We really got this announcement of the opportunity late spring, and from there we knew we had a deadline of August 1st to get this in. So what you have in front of you now is just the schedule we kept to and what we did to engage our stakeholders throughout the process. Something we're pretty proud of. We did get a lot of people, a lot of voices, and a lot of opinions on these matters. We expanded our awareness and all the associated activities with electrification in the state. We had lots of people, we had lots of sessions, and the events were, I'd say, very successful. We got a lot of valuable information, and what we did was include that information into the plan, and as of today, we can say that was successful as the plan was approved. So a little bit more on what we did, and there's a resource for you here as well. As I mentioned, our state agency, we partnered with the Office of Energy Resources, DEM. The next thing we did was to go out and make sure we had a website. This was really one of the first steps, and it seems simple nowadays, but it was something we really needed for a clearinghouse of information. A place people could go to learn about the guidance, but what really helped us out was it was a place you could sign up for alerts, emails, and then also directly submit your commentary. And they go directly to me, and I promise you they were entertaining, and you know, they were very useful. So we also wanted to get some feedback from the general public. What we did was all three of the groups, the core team, sent out, I want to say about 15,000 emails, just trying to reach as many people as possible. And through that process, the public survey, we actually got over 600 individual participants to give us their feedback. It's a relatively long survey, and we got over 1,000 comments on that. Again, if you like to read the comments at the end of articles, this was the place to be, and this is what I truly enjoyed. You got to see all spectrums of involvement, which we cannot shy away from if we're serious about doing this. You can't just focus on the very positive things. And of course, you don't want to read too many negative ones either. So we cannot operate in a vacuum over at RIDOT with this initiative. So we need to be sensitive to the other things going on as far as climate initiatives in the state. So in addition to our stakeholders, the general public and the NEVI guidance, we also had to incorporate climate-related initiatives that were going on in the electric vehicle infrastructure world. So this slide contains some of the larger initiatives. There are many more. And although the federal guidance and program structure for this program is somewhat narrow, we knew it was important to incorporate some of these overarching themes. So some of the strict guidance in the grant doesn't say exactly what you need to do. It's a guide. So what we used with this is saying, all right, well, there are some other things we need to pay attention into the state. Let's bring those in too. So the NEVI program really needs to be ready with the infrastructure to support the increased electric vehicle usage. And that is not just one narrow lane of travel, no pun intended. We really needed to bring the whole world together on that. So, as we see here, federal plan approved. So this just takes you through, again, a couple of the things that we had to focus on. Of course, climate goals, equitable access, Justice 40 communities, rural communities. We wanted to make sure that we didn't just deliver a plan that just barely met the guidelines. We wanted to get something a little bit more robust out there. And also I should mention, this is just the first year of a 5-year program. So as we get this up and running, it will be fine-tuned as we go along. You know, from the federal perspective, the NEVI plan seeks to connect states along electrified corridors. Now, due to our size, Rhode Island is uniquely positioned to accomplish this goal while also delivering the local access. So, for example, the guidance mandates a charging station every 50 miles. This was a very achievable goal for us. And, you know, because of that, we were able to be much more flexible with the rest of the development of the plan. So once we have certified that we accomplished the primary national connectivity goal, we can then begin to focus on the localized station and how it would affect the following areas: your climate goals, equitable access, and so on. And then again, can't say it enough, we did get that big federal check. Now, as I kind of alluded to earlier with the comments and feedback, there are risks and challenges here. Anybody who's familiar with this topic of electrical vehicle adoption knows there are some challenges associated with it. You've got voices of opposition that range from, you know, I'm never giving up my gas-powered vehicle, to people who are concerned about range anxiety or not enough places to charge. And like I said before, we can't just ignore these. We have to be aware of them, we have to anticipate them, and we have to come up with solutions to engage those people. You know, for instance, product availability we saw was a challenge, especially when it comes to the heavy-duty class vehicles. So what we need to do on our side for the NEVI program is to think about future-proofing these charging stations so that when those vehicles do become available, we don't have to tear everything up out of the ground and start over again. So it's a way to have a little bit of forward thinking in there. Despite the availability issues now, we can't just ignore that. Limitations on capacity with the grid is also a challenge. As you can imagine, paying attention to the news, you see what happens in California most recently. And expanding capacity in those areas where the electric load is already high, it can be a lot of cost involved with that when you're adding charging infrastructure. You may even be competing with non-related developments. If someone wanted affordable housing there, stores, complexes, things like that. The grid, you know, only has so much capability at this time right now. And then, of course, another risk is the cost of the electricity to the customer. The increase, we've got record high inflation. You've got to take these things into account when you're trying to predict and plan for the next cycle of this. So despite those risks and challenges, I like to remind everybody that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this situation. There is a lot of good we can achieve with our efforts despite these risks and challenges. RIDA is well suited to administer these federal funds. So I have a great team back in Providence headquarters. We are responsible for the administration of these funds. We have a great team that is used to doing large-scale competitive procurements. We'll be able to quickly adapt to that, follow all the relevant state guidelines, civil rights laws, and so on. And another piece that we've been very successful with is our communication. Communicating with the places these may be developed, the businesses surrounding them, and just getting the word out to everybody to lower the impacts to traffic and so on. Another thing I wanted to mention was the local communities and the business. So I touched on it for a minute, but we're seeing a lot of interest from both of those parties already. Now that we've got the federal funds announced, I expect that to increase more, but it's very inspiring to hear from people offering up their sites for development already. So that's another bit of good news with this. One other thing I wanted to touch on is the data collection aspect of this. So the feds have mandated within this program that you must have a data management plan to satisfy the NEVI program requirements. What does that mean? If you're out there driving around, you got to know, are these available? Where are they? What kind of connection types are available? How much does it cost? Are they reliable? All things we need to consider as part of this program. We've had some pilot programs out there. We've seen some of the early feedback. And if you're not communicating whether these sites are up or how much they cost, and you're not connected to the world like that, it makes it very difficult for the customer. And if we're trying to encourage adoption, we need to make sure we get those things out of the way and taken care of. Along those same lines, resiliency planning. You've got to think of just kind of the inclement weather we've had recently. Evacuation routes, seasonal communities. One of the major pushback items you hear from people is, what happens when there's a storm? What happens when there's a flood? How are we going to charge? So these are all things that we need to consider as an infrastructure agency, how to address those. Again, cannot just ignore these. It's not pleasant, but if you're serious about building these out and really making a thorough case for why these can work, these are things we have to look at. emergency response and preparedness, battery backup systems. We actually have emerging technology where we could turn, what may be considered a liability now into a positive. Solar-powered, bidirectional charging capabilities, they may even impact our strategies in the future. And that could improve our infrastructure response during extreme weather conditions. Not that we have had any lately. The roads have been dry and usable. So another big part of the plan, equity. Major part started off with the Justice 40 initiative passed by executive order. And what this is targeting 40% of the benefit of program spending towards disadvantaged communities. We also in our plan are going to consider Rhode Island enterprise zones. Those are that especially affected with low median household income, poverty, and unemployment. The goal of that is to increase access to charging stations for those folks, as well as eroding the barriers to the EV charging as a whole. That's something that is considered throughout this plan, and it's also something that the administration, the federal administration, has put right out front. So you can be assured as we go through this again, it's a holistic plan that considers all these elements. And another one that is both a challenge but also positive, the workforce development surrounding this. If you think of how many gas stations you've seen, you can imagine how many technicians and otherwise you'll need to upkeep all of these sites. So again, a little bit of a risk, or challenge I should say, but an opportunity to foster training programs to develop that staff. From here, installers, electric workers, service personnel, these are all things that are going to be needed as we move towards this charging network. That we will be exploring opportunities. We have our Department of Labor and Training. It's going to be a great place for us to work with, get the word out, and develop those technicians. And then as well as university, colleges, technical schools. So another part of the plan. We can't just say we're going to build these and then hope for the best. It's got to be a holistic approach where we look all the way down to who's going to be in there working on these. And then, of course, I always believe that it's really difficult to improve upon something if you're not measuring it. And we take that pretty seriously at my department. So as we're going through this process, we're going to be in a continuous feedback loop, our successes and our failures as well as the build-out moves forward. We'll be capturing lessons learned and incorporating them in the process, which is very vital in project management. This won't be a linear plan that doesn't get revisited and updated. As I mentioned earlier, the feds are requiring a plan every year. However, we're going to turn that around much shorter as far as updating our plan to be able to react to the conditions. We're going to have a changing, environment, a changing business climate, and the economic impacts as well. So something we're going to keep right up front. So where do we go from here? Next step. So like we're doing here tonight, we're going to continue to engage. We have many stakeholders we've identified in the hundreds already. Private businesses, general public, groups like here tonight, all those amazing energy fellows we heard about. These are the people we're going to keep engaging with. We're going to get them on board, and we've really got to focus on what the strategy should be going forward as we hit this procurement stage. We're going to be working again, DEM and energy resources, prepare those documentations, get ready to put this network out there to actually be procured. And as I said, being within the department, we'll be ready to do that. So as it stands, literally today we know we have the funding. I bet you tomorrow I start on the procurement. So that's where we stand right now, and that's where we're heading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John Paul. Just a note, we're going to hold all questions for all the panelists until the end. We're going to get through all the information and then bring folks up together, and any of the questions that you have, we'll answer then. So I want to introduce Dr. Chi next. So Dr. Chi is the Joan Wernig Sorensen Professor of Engineering at Brown University. She received her PhD degree in materials science with a minor in computer science from Caltech, and she spent the next 12 years working at the General Motors Research and Development Center. At GM, she developed multi-scale models starting from the atomistic, I'm not a scientist, level to solve engineering problems related to lightweight alloys, fuel cells, and batteries. She transitioned from industry to academia in 2013 and served on the faculty in the Chemical Engineering and Materials Science Department at Michigan State University till 2020. Professor Chi and her Materials Simulation for Clean Energy Lab development multi-scale simulation methods to design materials that are critically important for an energy efficient and sustainable future. So we're going to hear tonight about a lot of the research in battery technology and the stuff that's going to be essential to making these vehicles not only go further, but to be more resilient and sustainable and more environmentally sustainable and beneficial. So absolutely, Dr. Chi.
Let me use this one. I can't.
Technology. You could put that in your pocket, and I'll put this here. Oh, it doesn't stay.
Okay, we'll use this.
Yeah. That's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Oops, slides. I'm going to show this. Yes, thank you so much. Like, it's great, such a great pleasure and honor to join this forum to kind of share with you what a material scientist can do to contribute to electrification of our transportation system. So as you heard, I just came to Brown 2 years ago. When I told my colleagues that come to Brown make me feel home again, I didn't tell them coming to Rhode Island also make me feel home, because I grew up in a coastal city in northern China, and the ocean, the smell, the wind, and the seafood all make me feel home. Why I call it return to Brown, because when I joined GM in 2001, we started a GM and Brown Collaborative Research Lab. At the beginning, we worked on lightweight materials, and we worked on many different things. But in around, I think, 2010 or 2011-ish, we all start to work on battery materials, how battery fails. So we joined this great transformation you see in auto industry, and you can see then 2021, and GM even changed its logo to be more electric. And I want to challenge you, what's going to happen in another 10 years, another 20 years? It makes me feel old and also young again, because this is very exciting. So it has been projected that even without any policy change, by 2035, like 50% of vehicles sold worldwide will be electric. But that's without policy change. Of course, we can't wait. And there are a lot of policies, GM said they want to have only sell electric vehicles in 2035. And President Biden's goal is U.S. will sell 50% of electric vehicle by 2030, 5 years ahead of this prediction. California just banned sell gasoline-powered vehicle in 2035. And we heard like new policies like what Rhode Island is doing. We'll see accelerated paces for this vehicle electrification. And this is largely driven by battery technology. Battery was, first lithium-ion battery was commercialized in in 1991. And the price dropped almost like 30 times in the last 30 years. So you can project this and know what the price of the battery by 2035 when you this is how many years here? Almost 30 years. It actually took about 30 years for the Nobel Prize committee to recognize the contribution of materials for the society, right? So in 2019, the Nobel Prize is given to like three great scientists. So when we say a technology commercialized in 1991, the technology was not developed in 1991, it was developed long ago. So the first person with this on this is Professor Stan Whittingham. He first developed like lithium and a layered compound. It's called lithium titanium disulfide, and the lithium can kind of intercalate into those layers. And, but at that time, this was not a viable technology because he used the lithium metal. So later on, in 1980s, then Professor John Goodenough developed lithium cobalt oxide, shown on the right there. And that materials then you can also are also layered. You can intercalate lithium into the layers that push the voltage higher for the battery. And in 1985, Yoshino-san developed the negative electrode where he started with coke, and then it's kind of layered graphite later on, and he can intercalate lithium into the layers. And all this together lead to commercialization of lithium-ion batteries in 1991, right? 20 years from the first lithium disulfide development to the commercialization. And it's another 30 years for the price to drop for us to use this technology. So are we ready, actually, to take this transformation even further? The International Energy Agency kind of predicted a shift from a fuel-intensive to a material-intensive energy system, because we need a lot of different materials in this system. It's not just carbon and hydrogen anymore. So this is Tesla's map where there's their gigafactory. It shows where they get their materials. You have a cobalt, you have lithium, you have some carbon, you have also some magnesium and nickel in this. 2/3 of global supply of cobalt comes from Congo. You want to diversify the materials we used here. And currently, U.S. is a big importer for both batteries and battery materials. Hopefully, we'll kind of, with the new initiatives, we'll be able to push the battery manufacturing and the supply chain, starting from the raw materials, right? If we think about a future economy and the supplies, we can, if fuel we want to improve the energy density of our system, because we have to carry this battery around. So we have to look for more materials, especially the materials in the top of our periodic table. We want to more diverse a set of materials. And because we have different demands of our batteries or energy storage systems, and we have to find the most suitable materials for them. So I want to ask why it's so hard? Why it takes so long for the materials and to be integrated into a battery? So first, we need a lot. I would say design a battery probably as complicated as designing a car. Here's we have what we are showing there. You have like a copper current collector, and you have like those graphite particle anode, and then you have in the middle with a separator and with filled with like a liquid electrolyte that carries the lithium ion going back and forth, and then you have another layer like particles where you see those are like cathode materials, and then you have another current collector. It's a system. It's a system design. What we need is higher density. So the two sides of the material, the two electrode material, their voltage, their capacities kind of define the energy of your system. We also want to charge our battery fast. We want to run our cars fast, and then the lithium has to kind of transfer from one end to the other. And it has to pass, then go from the center of that particle, go through one interface and go through that liquid electrolyte and go through another interface and get stored in the other electrode, right? So there are many things that they have to pass, and any place it gets stuck or get lost or have some other side reactions, we have capacity loss, we have power loss of a battery. So it's energy density, it's durability, and it's a power, and the cost. It's all together. So it's not just design a piece of material, it's also design a whole system. Our goal is trying to accelerate this design process. We hope we start with our simulation. When we think about it, we start from atoms and we look at their chemical bond. We understand their properties, and we also put them together. And so we can simulate the material. We can manipulate the material on the computer, and also predict their performance at the end in the car, in the battery. So in that case, we can do lots of virtual testing before the battery actually made. Right, so let me show some examples. And that particle I showed you, one particle is about like a micron size. A micron size of particle is about a tenth of the size of my hair. So the problem with this particle is made a lot of crystals regions in different different orientations. We call it polycrystal. And when lithium goes in and out of that particle, and each domain can start to expand, contract into different directions. And then the particle gets fractured, right? So two things we want to solve. One is we want to grow the same size of particle with only one grain. So that is a single crystalline particle right there. And also, we want to replace this cobalt because the source is really focused. So nickel, we developed a high nickel content electrode. I didn't do the experiment. I collaborated with Professor Jie Xiao at the Pacific North National Lab to do that. But what we predict is the stress level can be developed during cycling inside the particle. And particularly with these, we can predict at what size of this particle you can crack up, you can open up some space, and that's not going to be enough to crack the whole particle. So in the next cycle, you may heal it, and overall our particles are safe, our electrodes are safe. So for this, we can achieve higher cycle life in our battery. So that's one modeling, right? What we really didn't change too much of our battery. We still this structure is still this layered structure. If you look at the DOE's roadmap, 5 years ago, DOE called this like if you look at the bottom here, they all showed beyond lithium to reach the cost, like to further lower the cost and further increase the usable energy density. All of those new chemistries involve like lithium metal. 1, 2, 3, 7 out of them, like 6 out of 7 use the lithium metal. The rest use the magnesium metal. None of them use graphite anymore, right? So this is like, you can think about these layers are like hotel rooms for lithium. To store more lithium, we want to get rid of the hotel room, we just want the lithium. And so that's, but this was the electrode that Stan Willingham developed in his first lithium battery in 1970s. But I said early on, I said it's not viable, and we're going to make it viable this time. So that's what go. But the problem is there. Like the lithium can grow dendrites, like penetrate the cell, shorten the cell, and catch some fires. Like the organic electrolyte within the battery, yeah, it can cause some like a thermal event. So we try to model this. We try to connect the very fundamental, like atomic scale of the interface, right? So what do you see there? How they grow in like at the right hand, hand side, like whether they grow this mossy structure or this very clean shaped structure, really come from this interface where we have lithium top lithium metal, bottom is magnesium metal, and the liquid electrolyte where the ion transports through. And how this ion goes through this interface actually dictate like this morphology observed in the battery when it runs. So after this model, we can further ask questions, how can we change this interface? Can we change a different chemistry for electrolyte? Can we make it still transport lithium at low temperature, not freezing, right? And can we make it transport through this interface faster without generating this dendrite lithium and cause like danger of failure. So that we have several support to continue this work. But as I said, this liquid electrolyte consists of like organic compounds. It's easy to catch fire. So can we replace that? Can we replace that with like just a solid? In the last 10 years, there are a lot of development in this field, and we have found lithium ion, even solid electrolyte that carry has the lithium ion conductivity as fast as liquid electrolyte. We want to push the limit, right? So many of them are really rigid. It's not easy to manufacture. And not recyclable or reusable. And so I collaborate with Professor Bing Hu from University of Maryland. Then we said, why don't we start from something that's greener, like a tree, right? Like a paper. So in paper, you have this fibers, and within the fiber, you have chains of cellular chains. They're too tight, and lithium cannot go into it. So the first step is we put some copper ions into it and open up the space. And then lithium can go in and then can transport. So it's like a highway for lithium ion to transport. And those are kind of simulations. You can, this purple balls and the lithium, they can hop. So the challenge, the next challenge is this process to make this material is very, very slow because it takes a long time for this copper to get into it. So we're looking for other ions to get in quicker, and then we can have a shorter manufacturing time to make this solid electrolyte. And we also find what really kind of allow this lithium ion to move is you happen to have some residual water within the channel. And these can kind of knock the lithium off from their happy side and move forward. But that's kind of challenging when you pair this with very high energy electrode. Again, it's a balancing act. When we solve one problem, we have a new problem to solve. Putting all these different pieces of materials together to make a battery, that's really challenging. So we have like a new DOU project to work on this. So I think I try to convince you that we need lots of material research for batteries, and we want to think about battery manufacturing and materials used for batteries in like a circular cycle, and to be able to reuse and recycle, rejuvenate our batteries, and lower the cost of the battery, increase the energy density of the battery. And when we diverse this choice of the batteries, that means that the battery can be used, like we can design different batteries for cars, for like flights, for grid storage, for power tools. They don't have to all rely on the same chemistry, right? So besides research, I think what I'm really trying to do at Brown is to train our talent. As you heard, we need an electrician, we need a mechanical engineer, we need someone who understands chemistry, chemical engineer, material science, and so our future engineers probably need to know all of this, and in the big context of economy and policies. We train our students through, of course, teaching projects and research, and a lot of collaborations are happening at Brown and URI. I've known Professor Bright Lunch for many, many years. We all interested in this electrolyte interface for many, many years. So a partnership with national labs and industry. Brown is in the process to establish Institute for Sustainable Energy, and stay tuned for that. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chi. That was a lot of information, and I think as an electric vehicle driver, I am glad that someone understands how to put the battery together and make it work, and is working to improve that constantly, because it's certainly a challenge, and we want to make sure that it's being done more sustainably, and so we need cutting-edge research just like that to progress things forward. So our final speaker of the night before we get to questions is Greg Nordin, and Greg is with RIPTA. He's the Chief of Strategic Advancement at RIPTA, and he's been with them since 2011 and heavily involved in RIPTA's capital program. And I know Greg from a lot of different efforts that RIPTA's doing right now to get 15-minute service through downtown Providence on the R line, to electrify the fleet, to electrify the operations on Aquidneck Island, to put in vehicle charging for the buses. So he's at the heart of all of that, and so I'm excited to introduce him tonight and let him update us on some of the latest and greatest from RIPTA.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you to Kayla, Kate, and Kurta as well for hosting us tonight. It's a lot of K names. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Oh, there I am. Oh, this is actually the older version. Did you? It is. All right, so this is going to be fun. This is the older version of my presentation, so I have no idea what's in here. So as Hank said, my name is Greg Nordin. I am the Chief of Strategic Advancement at the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. I've been with the agency for about 11 years. I oversee our agency's planning functions, as well as our marketing, our customer service, and also our project management function. So I've got my hands on a whole bunch of little different parts of the agency, but this is actually probably one of my favorite things to talk about is our electrification program. It's really exciting. We're doing some really cool stuff, and I'm just really happy to be here tonight to share it with you all. So thank you for coming out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the basics of what we're doing right now with our ZEV program. ZEV stands for Zero Emissions Vehicle, sorry. And then I'm going to talk about what we're learning out of those programs that we're working on, some of the impacts, and then talk about some of the next steps that we're going to be taking as we start to expand this. So just to give you a little bit of background about what we're doing at RIPTA, we actually have been talking about electrification and moving away from diesel vehicles for actually a long time now. We actually had purchased our first hybrid buses back in 2010. Those are actually getting ready to be retired. They're that old. In 2014, the state passed the Resilient Rhode Island Act. In 2015, there was an executive order called Lead by Example that basically charged state and quasi-governmental agencies with leading by example when it comes to electrification. In 2016, the state of Rhode Island adopted a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan. We heavily participated in that because we have one of the largest fleets in the state. We operate about 240 vehicles on our fixed route side, and then we have another 100 vehicles on paratransit. In 2017, there was the VW emissions scandal. That's relevant because a large portion of the funds that the state received from VW actually came to RIPTA, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then, well, let's just go ahead and get into the fun stuff. So we're actually in the middle of a 3-part pilot program at RIPTA. We have 3 phases to our pilot program. Our first phase on our pilot program at RIPTA with electrification is called our demonstration pilot. And this is really just digging into and understanding the technology with only the outcome of understanding it better so we can make smarter decisions as we move ahead. Phase 2 is actually just trying to tackle a broader project, thinking about it in terms of a more global scale for the agency. And then phase 3 is really thinking about all the ancillary things to this that are not just about vehicle electrification, but thinking about all the things we need to do to support electrification. And I'll talk more about what that means here in just a minute. So our phase 1 pilot was really straightforward. We bought 3 electric buses. You may have seen them if you live in Providence or in the northern part of the state. We bought 3 buses back in 2018. They were called a Proterra Catalyst E2 bus. They're fully electric. They had this kind of cool wrap on them that was a little different. And they entered service in 2019, and we went through a whole process for a year to basically bring them on board, make sure they were safe, did all our testing. And these are what are called a depot charging vehicle. These are vehicles that actually every night they charge at our main facility in Providence. They plug in to a charger, they charge overnight, and then in the morning they're ready for service and they run all day without actually charging. So the technology is basically that they go as long as that battery will allow them to go. And actually, this is a pilot that we just completed this fall. We actually own those vehicles, so they're gonna just be part of our fleet. But as far as we're concerned, the piloting phase of this is over. And I'm gonna talk more about what we actually learned out of this, but I just wanna get the basics out of the way. One of the things that we actually did with this pilot is what we had to do is we actually had to account for the range of these vehicles. So normally when you buy a diesel bus and you fill it with fuel, we get about 400 miles out of that tank of fuel. With an electric vehicle, it's significantly less. These were advertised to us to get a range of about 200 miles, which is already a reduction of what we currently have. But when we actually started putting them in practice, we were getting a range of about 70, 80 miles, which is a really big drop off from what we expected. So we actually had to recut our service. And what I mean by that is we build all the service and we turn it into jobs for our drivers. And that service is really dictated by a couple of things: the range of the vehicle and the work hours of those drivers. Obviously, with a range of 70 miles, we had to rethink how long those buses could be on the road. While we had them deployed for a couple of years, we saw that the range was getting better with time, but on the whole, we were only getting about 70, 80 miles a day. Our phase 2 project is what we're calling our expansion project. And this is what we're most excited about right now. We're in the middle of this. And I knew it was the old slide deck because it has a picture of this bus. Actually, these have just started arriving. But we've just purchased 14 buses. These are from a different company called New Flyer. And they're actually starting to be delivered to RIPTA right now. Of the 14, we have 4 of them on our property, and the other 10 will be here by the end of the year. And this is a really exciting project for us because this is going to actually replace all of the buses on the R line. And if you're familiar with our service, the R line is our busiest route in our system. It carries about 20% of our passengers. And it operates every 10 minutes on Broad Street in Providence and North Main Street all the way up into downtown Pawtucket. It carries on average about 10,000 people a day. And when we electrify this, that means that 20% of our riders will then be riding on a fully electric bus. The one big fundamental difference with this project opposed to our first phase of the pilot is that we're switching the technology. We're going from a depot charge vehicle to what we call an inline charge vehicle. And what that means is instead of charging overnight at our depot, we're actually constructing chargers in the roadway where these vehicles will pull up underneath it. A little arm will come down over this catenary. It's called a pantograph. It looks like an oversized street light. Bus will pull underneath it, a little arm will come down, and it will charge in like 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, it'll go back into service, do a couple of trips, come back and charge another 10 minutes or so, and it'll do that throughout the day. So it's a really big change for us. Our phase 3 pilot is actually just getting started right now, and this is our most ambitious pilot. And this is actually going one step further with our electrification. This is a pilot project. We actually have a garage in Middletown. It operates about 30 vehicles, and it provides most of the service on Aquidneck Island. We are fully electrifying that garage, which is huge for us. So we just received a huge grant actually 3 weeks ago from the Federal Transit Administration. We received $22 million to help with that project. All in, we've got about $45 million set aside to complete this project. We expect that this is going to this will be completed sometime in the next 2025-2026 area. What makes this project unique from the other two is that we're looking a step beyond just electrification. So if you're familiar with RIPTA, whenever there's an emergency event, a flood, a gas outage, anything like that, RIPTA is at the scene, usually helping transport people from that scene to warming centers, getting them evacuated, that type of thing. We don't want to lose the ability to do that. And with an electric vehicle, if the grid goes down, what happens to our buses? Well, we might have 70 or 80 miles on them, which may not be sufficient. So this project is really focusing on making sure that when we are electrifying our buses, we're not losing the ability to do that. So we're looking at things like building in microgrids, thinking about substations, bringing in more solar panels. So this is really exciting because it's not just electrifying our buses, but it's thinking about the bigger picture about how that power gets to us and how we're generating it. So let's talk about what we're learning. And this is actually, I'm going to go kind of quickly through this, but we don't have to go into a ton of detail. So we're learning a whole bunch of stuff right now about this as we learn about this. So first of all, the cost of our vehicles. A standard diesel bus costs the agency about $600,000 all in. An electric bus is about $1 million. So right there, we've got about a 50% premium on the existing cost of our buses. That does not include the charging infrastructure. So for our pilot project that we're working right now in Providence to electrify the R line, where we're building a charging station, we just got 14 buses. That was about $14 million. Then we're spending another $6 million on building a charging station. So to electrify a route that requires 14 buses, it's going to cost us about $20 million. Whereas if we were to buy those outright, you're looking at somewhere in the $10 to $12 million range if they were diesel vehicles. So there is a cost differential. That's something that we have to start planning for. The problem with this is that up until very, very recently, there's been a lot of excitement around electrification, but there hasn't actually been the money to back that up. So what this chart shows you is over the past 5-6 years, this is not just RIPTA, this is actually the entire country. The federal government operates a program called Low-No, which is basically money set aside for transit buses to buy them that are specifically low or no emission vehicles. The red bar represents the total amount of requests that came into the Federal Transit Administration, and the green bar represents the money that was actually available for those awards. So what that translates to is a lot of agencies had a lot of interest in electrifying, but the reality is that the money just wasn't there to support it. So for example, we submitted a $13 million grant in 21. We received $5 million. Already 5-minute warning? Wow, I'll go faster. So this just really highlights the fact that at a federal level, there really has not been a lot of money and so it's been really difficult to make plans for the future when you don't know where the money is coming from. That has changed recently. IIJA, the new Inflation Reduction Act are bringing a ton of money to us right now, but even then it's still discretionary. It's not guaranteed. We actually have to go compete for those funds, which still makes it difficult to really build a foundation for electrifying our fleet. Some of the other things that we're learning, we're a commercial ratepayer, which basically means we don't have a special deal with Rhode Island Energy. So when we're electrifying our buses, if we're doing it in the middle of the day, which is what we're doing in our new phase 2 pilot project, we're actually paying peak demand charges, which make those buses even more expensive than filling them with diesel gas, even at $4 a gallon. So part of what we're trying to accomplish with our third phase pilot is that we're going to bring in battery charging or battery storage. We'll charge those batteries overnight and use that battery storage to basically charge the vehicles throughout the day, so we're actually getting cheaper utility rates. Just to give you some example, 14 battery electric buses is about the equivalent of amount of energy of powering about 1,000 houses. Just another thing that we need to talk about, JP's work that he's doing over at DOT is fantastic, but we unfortunately don't get to benefit from that at RIPTA because we have an entirely different set of charging infrastructure. We don't get to use the chargers that you see set up on the side of the road. We actually have to go out and build our own. And actually that picture on the right shows you what a pantograph looks like. That's what we're actually in the middle of constructing right now. Not only do we have to have special charging infrastructure, but it's also still evolving in our industry. So there's the depot charging, which is kind of your slow charge. You've got your pantographs, and then you've got what this is in the newest technology, the wireless induction charging that we're starting to see crop up, where you don't actually build the pantographs, but instead you have an electrified pad that you pull over and it charges your bus from underneath. It's, again, very challenging to electrify your fleet when you're not really entirely sure where the technology is going. This is one issue I've kind of already touched on a little bit, vehicle range issues. We purchased our buses thinking we were going to get 200 to 300 miles out of them a day. Instead, we're seeing about 70 to 80 miles per day. What's even more challenging about this is that range is really contingent on a whole bunch of factors. On a cold day, we see our range go down significantly. If you have a hill, that changes things. It's really kind of crazy when we'll watch these vehicles in real time and realize that the vehicle has been out for 4 hours and it has to come back into the garage because we just don't have the range anymore. I'm going to skip past this in the interest of time, but I've kind of talked about this already. We are currently working on making sure that our next phase project is really focusing on resilience and redundancy. And then this is the other area where we actually really didn't expect to learn a whole lot, but we've actually learned quite a bit, which is our drivers. So electric vehicles, you think, oh, if you buy an electric vehicle, it's just like driving a gas or a diesel powered vehicle, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. We've had to go through so much training with our drivers because we're finding that some drivers will drive in a way that actually spends the vehicle's battery faster. So there's this constant training that's needing to go on. And it just handles differently. They don't idle. So these buses, if you take your foot off the gas, it starts recharging that battery immediately. So it changes the way our drivers are driving. It's also forcing us to rethink our maintenance program, how we store our vehicles. A lot of our vehicles are stored outdoors. That really isn't conducive to charging an electric bus when every time you turn that bus on, it's drawing battery down. So if you have to heat it up on a cold day, that's eating up battery life that you could otherwise be using for service. So what are we doing next? So we are in the process right now of integrating I'm going to skip this slide and go right on to the next one. We are in the process right now of completing an action plan that's called our Action Plan for Electrification and Service Growth. And this is really focused on taking the recommendations that came out of our adopted 2020 master plan that sets a vision for growth of the agency over the next 20 years and combining them with electrification goals and essentially giving us a year-by-year bunch of steps we need to take to fully electrify our service. We're about halfway through that planning process, and we expect that it'll be done this upcoming spring, and then it will set the stage for us to start electrifying more routes as we move through that process, or after that process. We're also going to be figuring out how to leverage more federal funding. The IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act have been game changers for our industry. We're still not fully aware of all the ways that things are changing, but the reality is that we're working very closely with our peers or our congressional delegation to make sure that we're bringing as much money back to Rhode Island to get this work done. So, in conclusion, there's a few points you should walk away with from this. Number one is this is a brave new world for us. We really don't have any precedent for where we're going. In the course of the transit industry, there really hasn't been this type of disruption in 70 years. The technology is still continually evolving, and to move forward, we have to be willing to be flexible and adapt to that. And it really does require a long-term sustained investment that we just have not seen yet. The one point I want everyone to walk away with tonight, though, is that if you were to guess how much of the state's emissions profile is generated by public transit, I think most people will be surprised to learn that that is actually less than 1%. So when you look at the total emissions from this state, less than 1% of that is generated by RIPTA. And I'm not saying that to say that we don't have to decarbonize, but it's far more impactful if people actually get out of their car and actually ride RIPTA, which is the thing that people seem to think doesn't apply to them. But the reality is if 7,000 people in the state of Rhode Island got out of their car and got into a bus, it would have the exact same impact as totally electrifying our fleet. Just 7,000. So the big parting thing is take the bus. It's actually going to be a whole lot better than us just electrifying everything. We're still going to do it, but take the bus anyways. So thank you.
Now would be a good time for a mic drop, Greg. Yeah. So before we do questions, I would be remiss if we didn't mention the next two parties we're having, which are the second and third lectures in our series here. The second lecture is on Thursday, October 6th, which I think is 3 weeks from today, something like that, 2 maybe. And it's an exciting one. It's not a locally relevant topic per se, but the gentlemen who will be here, their work was featured on 60 Minutes. They were responsible for engineering a system to stop an oil spill that had been going on for a decade. A lot of us didn't know about it until it came into the mainstream media, and they will physically be here. That's Timmy Coulvion there and Kevin Kennelly, who are both engineers, and then Pat McShane is actually a URI alum. He graduated from the Department of Marine Affairs in 1985, and they're going to talk about their journey to force Taylor Energy to start capturing the oil that was continuously spilling into the Gulf of Mexico for over a decade. So you don't want to miss that one. And then our third and last lecture is on October 20th, and we're bringing it back to a local regional conversation with some friends of ours, including a PhD student who is working on his energy fellowship in a cybersecurity lab. But this one is all about electric grid reliability. So as was the case this evening, nothing is ever what it seems. These are very complicated, complex challenges. We're lucky to have such brilliant people working on them. And so I think we would love to have a Q&A. I'm going to ask Kurta if he'll pull some chairs up in the front, maybe these first three, and we'll have Hank moderate a Q&A for us. So if the speakers wouldn't mind coming up, that'd be great.
Thanks, Kate. And I'll just note that this session on the screen right now is in the Swan Auditorium, not here. So if you're showing up for that one, don't reflexively come here. So I want to thank all of our panelists again, Kurta, Kate, Kaylin, everybody that helped put this together. This was a really important panel. Obviously, electric vehicles and transportation generally are in the news quite a bit. Lots of companies are making the transition. All the big companies have made the announcement that they'll be phasing out their gas-powered vehicles. I'm looking forward to the electric Corvette that GM, I'm sure, will be developing any day now. But we want to turn it over to the audience for some questions. I have a whole stack in my head in case you're all feeling shy, but I think that you probably have quite a number. So let's pass this mic around. And just announce who you are.
My name's Alfred Jeffries. I'm a big advocate of public transit. I want to ask the RIPTA gentleman if do you foresee in the future building your own 1 or 2 wind turbines or solar fields to completely charge these buses with green energy? I think a wind turbine might help too. Thank you.
And my apologies to those watching from home. I forgot to run the mic back up to the panelists for the answer, so I'll be doing that now.
Thank you. My name is Susan Marcus, and my question to all of you, but maybe with respect to RIPTA, is there's been no mention of electric trains, and that seems to me to be a very important way to move Rhode Island forward in electrifying its vehicles, because we have an Amtrak track, we have the MBTA track, and it would be wonderful if we could have RIPTA and that train service working together, but I didn't hear anything about that. Thank you.
And I'll probably hand the mic to John Paul because DOT and MBTA are... no, both of you? Oh, okay.
So I was being shooed off stage, so I would have gotten to it eventually. No, I'm kidding. No, so that's a really great point. Part of the reason I didn't talk about it was because I was really trying to focus on what we are working on at this very moment and our experiences with electrification. So the Northeast Corridor is already fully electrified. MBTA service is not. What I mentioned it briefly in my presentation that we adopted in 2020 a 20-year master plan, which is the first transit master plan that the state's ever adopted. And it sets out a really ambitious course for transit service in the state of Rhode Island. For example, we have about 240 vehicles right now. That calls for us to increase our bus service to about 400 vehicles. But one thing I didn't mention in that is that we also have in there identified high-capacity transit corridors, including light rail. We're actually kicking off the first study of that later this fall or winter, I guess. And it's looking at actually the creation of a rail corridor connecting Central Falls all the way down to Warwick, to CCRI and to the airport. So it'll hit Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, Cranston, and then Warwick. And it just shows that there's so many people that would utilize that service that the ridership number, the projected ridership numbers are very high for that corridor. Part of that is looking at what type of train service that would be, including making it electric. But that is actually something that we are starting to work on.
Great question, great answer. I don't know who had it up first, so I'll go.
Fred Skolko. I'm curious, in terms of the approach you're using, why the sort of a diversification of energy resources has not been considered. We seem monofocal on electric, and yet we have gas, hydrogen power, for instance. We can use that as a supplemental fuel. Is the cost efficiency of hydrogen less than the cost efficiency of wind and solar, or are we perhaps looking at a highly complex energy system versus a gaseous energy system, which is fairly simple and has been used efficiently, to move vehicles, to create heat, etc. Is, in your mind, Dr. Xi, are you thinking that perhaps we're putting too many eggs in one basket as we did in the oil and gas scenario at one point?
Actually, hydrogen is part of this energy source, right? So, and the DOE has this energy grid, and hydrogen is part of that. In terms of we worked on hydrogen fuel cells before. They still in terms they still have some advantages in terms of charging speed, right? It's faster than batteries. At this moment, I think it's back to the table. DOE just released more calls in terms of developing the hydrogen materials, hydrogen generation, hydrogen cells. Yeah, so I think we have to work in many technologies. Yeah.
Here we go.
Good evening, Gary Parker. Dr. Chi, thank you. Ma'am, you mentioned your lab is doing work on finding some other materials besides just pure lithium. Cobalt, you mentioned, with 2/3 of that's in the Congo, strategically unstable. Is your team looking at more strategically stable resources for your batteries? And also, are you looking at the full life cycle in terms of the recyclability or the disposal of these batteries once they've reached their useful life?
So in terms of the cathode materials, like the high nickel was one of our focus. Of course, this year we see the price of fluctuation for nickel again. So definitely the other earth-abundant material for the cathode, it would be sulfur, lithium sulfur batteries, as much cheaper and with abundant materials. And you go further, it will be sodium sulfur, or so we're like a modeling group. So for us to study any of those new materials is zero cost. So we are looking at them. And the recycle is very interesting, actually. I just start to look into that area. Yeah.
I was wondering if you guys were looking into retrofitting some of those older buses to electric instead of buying new electric buses. Is that been looked into? Would it be cheaper than brand new ones?
No, unfortunately, no. So we have a add into the fact that we're trying to electrify these vehicles. We also have the distinction of being in a northern climate. So there are agencies in the country that will see buses last for 15, 20 years, but they tend to be in more temperate climates that don't have a lot of weather. It's very easy to run a transit system when you live in Santa Fe. Unfortunately, we are not retrofitting those vehicles. The build of them is completely different. And we have, we tend to get about 12 to 14 years out of our buses, and they tend to just start falling apart at the seams.
All right, and you had a follow-up question.
Thank you. The other thing was, over by my house, there's like 7, by the landfill, the central landfill, there's 7 huge wind turbines. Now, and I always think, and maybe this will put it to bed, why not build a hydrogen infrastructure right there, and when those windmills are down, because I notice they're down quite a bit, and it's not because there's not wind. There's always wind blowing up there, always. And so they shut them down maybe, I don't know what the agreement is with the grid, but it looks like they shut them down deliberately. They put the brakes on. But instead of shutting them down, how about investing in a whole hydrogen infrastructure up by the landfill, So you could think about fuel cells, and not only that, but hydrogen fuel cells can go with anything. But at some point, there has to be some infrastructure for the hydrogen. We talk about hydrogen, but there's no hydrogen storage. There's no hydrogen fueling stations. They're not even close, right? So I think about that, and I don't know the particulars. I don't know why they're shut down. I don't know who owns them. I don't know any of the logistics. But it looks like a great spot for a hydrogen, maybe even an ammonia storage facility to crack it into hydrogen from there, and even move, instead of always being at Melrose Street, move the whole bus terminal away from there. Because why do you got to stay there if it seems like it's such a big problem to electrify that spot? Move it closer to the source, right? So I guess my question would be, has that been considered? Hydrogen, and I don't know if it falls under you guys are busy, I understand, and it might fall under that's a whole different project I'm talking about. But are you aware of the turbines I'm talking about? And has that ever been considered, or has that come up on the radar for the state, the DOT, on making an infrastructure, a hydrogen infrastructure?
You said Greg, new project, or John Paul? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, great. Really good stuff. What I can say is this is an interesting part in time where folks like me and Greg are actually getting together to start to think of these bigger ideas. So what you're talking about right now is actually getting captured in some legislation that recently passed. I referenced it in one of my slides. We had the Climate Change Act. We now have groups that are set up within government from the government agencies that are designed to do these larger scale statewide type initiatives. One of them is the EC4. That's a new commission that's relatively new that is slated to do these kind of large scale initiatives like you're talking about. So keep them coming, big idea. There might be something there, and go on.
So there are definitely different technologies. Energy storage need to be part of the energy generation, right? Where you generate it, sometimes it's, you don't put it back to the grid. You have to store it. So fuel cell is one, hydrogen is one, but there are other battery technologies like flow batteries. And I think in this series, there has been discussed about greatest energy storage, right? You have to show me where it is.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have to take this. You know, to take this on the road, and just for folks in the room, because we've talked a lot about hydrogen, the Office of Energy Resources, which is another state agency that's not here tonight, but is represented throughout the series usually. They're working as part of the Department of Energy's efforts to accelerate these clean hydrogen hubs throughout the country. And so Rhode Island is signed on to an agreement with other states in our region to develop proposals on how to develop clean hydrogen and use it. So a lot more to come on that, but we're in the very early stages of that.
Awesome. My name's Josh. Thank you for the talk. I appreciated it. I have two questions. I'll try to keep them quick. One is with that last sentence in red on the RIPTA presentation. I'm just curious what the state is doing to try to push people to actually take RIPTA. Because I do it because I think it's the right thing to do, but I think it needs to be the most convenient option. So I'm trying to see what's up in the works there. Number two is, I know that batteries lose capacity with charge cycles. I'm curious what the lifespan of the bus batteries is expected to be, or if you've run into decreasing range already in your testing.
Great questions. That might be a combo answer.
So first I'm going to say that if a Rhode Islander invites you to a landfill, don't go. Yeah, so Josh, that's a fantastic question. So I referenced the Transit Master Plan, and that was a study we started in 2017, 18. It was a 2-year study. We talked to well over 1,000 people, riders, non-riders, people that are interested in riding but just haven't made the leap, and really focused that study on what do we do to make transit attractive. And it was not a cost neutral study. It was all about what is the level of transit that the state needs versus what is the level of transit that we're currently supporting. And that study really does set out a pretty clear guidepost for where we need to be. The reality about transit is people don't ride transit that's inconvenient. If you can get into a car any time of the day and go anywhere you want, why would you ride transit? And so it really focuses on the fundamentals of what are we consider to be good transit, which is frequency of service, span of service, and just availability throughout the week. So it focuses on investments in 3 areas: making sure that your routes come very frequently so you don't have to wait any more than 20 minutes, making sure that they go to late at night and start very early in the morning, so if you don't work a 9-to-5 job, you can actually get home when you get off of your shift, and that it operates 7 days a week, because what good is service if you can't actually go out on a Saturday or Sunday? So it invests in that, and we're actually right now starting to, this year, we are in the process of really making a push that we want this plan funded legislatively. So this upcoming year, you're going to see a lot of action from RIPTA around investing in transit and working with the legislature to actually find sustainable funding for that plan. We're really proud of that work. The state has already adopted it, but they just haven't funded it. Your question about range degradation, we have not seen that as an issue yet. The vehicles we have are still relatively new. The 3 vehicles we're operating are only a couple years old. It's something we're concerned about, but we haven't seen yet. But what I will say is actually the bigger issue for us is not the range degradation, but that when you buy a diesel bus, I can put that diesel bus on any route in the state and it will operate just fine. When I buy an electric bus, I'm buying it specifically for that route. So we build the battery specifically to that route, so it's got the capacity to handle whatever that route throws at it, which really complicates how we dispatch service, because when you have 240 vehicles that you can just use anywhere, and then suddenly you've got 240 different vehicles that can only go in certain places, it really changes how you think about your service. And that's actually the bigger concern than the degradation. I'm sure we'll get to that point, but we just haven't yet.
I can say something about degradation. I think when you get the vehicle, they typically give you like about 10 years warranty. They can do this by over-designing. We need 40 kilowatt hour to run 40 miles, but they put an 8 kilowatt hours battery there just for that warranty, right? The other thing is in the transportation, at least for cars, when the capacity dropped to 20%, they will think this is not good enough for transportation. So there are also some second use for car batteries.
All right, this is going to be the last question, and I think, well, I think you've both already got one. I see one hand up in the back. I see two hands up in the back. But let's make these the last two then, because we definitely want to have the students come in.
Well, hello, my name is Josh. I'm a 2022 Energy Fellow. I actually had 3 questions, so I'm going to settle on the one I had for Dr. Chi. I heard something that people are kind of exploring the prospect of sodium batteries. And now you said that main goal of yours is to diversify the materials that you're using, and sodium is like extremely abundant. Yeah, there's like deserts full of it. And I was just wondering if you've explored anything in that area. Ask the 3? Okay. And then, Mr. Verducci, in your presentation, you said 40% of the funds were going to be allocated to underprivileged communities. And I was just wondering what drove you to that figure. And then for Mr. Nordin, I know the Westerly buses, the school buses, are using demand response as means to cover the cost difference. And I was wondering if you've explored options like that to cover the immense cost difference between a diesel and an electric bus.
All right, you're welcome. So we've got sodium, we've got Justice 40, and then we've got demand response vehicle to grid.
Yeah, good question. Sodium is a very active research area, and I also have research projects, sodium electrodes, sodium batteries.
So I did go through it a little bit quick on there, but what I actually was referencing is what's called the Justice 40 initiative. That is part of the federal guidance, and essentially it just means that 40% of the benefits, which is a vague definition right now, it's not super defined yet, the guidance is still coming out, must go to those communities that qualify that. In Rhode Island, we typically call them distressed communities. So we already do kind of know where those are. This just mandates that 40% of the benefit goes to them. So great question.
When you say demand response, are you referring to the service where you, like Uber, where you schedule a trip? What do you mean by that? Yep. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Now I understand. Thank you. I was like, wait, what does that have to do with Uber? Yeah, no, we have not looked at that. Our service model is very different from schools. While we are in the peaks, so our buses tend to be on the road for, it's not uncommon to put a bus out on the road and leave it out there for 16 hours. So our ability to sort of use our buses as battery storage to offset peak demand charges is pretty limited, but we are looking at battery storage as a solution for that. We're not using our buses to do that. But there is a lot of work going into right now actually doing exactly what you're talking about, not to like offset costs, but in emergency situations, a bus battery with bidirectional charging is a really attractive thing because now you have a giant mobile battery that you can move somewhere. So that is being looked at, just not for our day-to-day operations.
And the very last question, however many parts there are, the very last question, and then we'll give our panel a big round of applause.
Hello, my name is Nick Parati. I'm a student here, and first of all, thank you so much for presenting. It was a wonderful presentation. I have a question for John Paul from our Department of Transportation. I want to preface my question with just acknowledging the fact that today electric vehicles still remain for the average American or the average Rhode Islander a luxury, just because they're significantly more expensive. at retail and they're in high demand. So you mentioned putting millions of dollars into electrical vehicle charging stations, and while that is a tremendous precedent for going green, in many people's view, that is benefiting using taxpayer dollars only those that are already quite affluent enough to afford electric vehicles. So my question is, what ways or methods is RI-DOT addressing accessibility and making electric vehicles themselves more affordable for a broke college student like me driving a 04 Honda Pilot?
Great question.
First of all, do you know Josh over there? Because his question actually relates right to this. The Justice 40 initiative is actually designed to channel those funds into the communities that are least likely to already have the electric vehicles. So that's part of it, is to kind of encourage it in areas where they may not be already. And one of the other things I kind of mentioned on the slide is not operating in a vacuum and embracing these challenges. So great question, great point, and it's one of the first things I heard when I started this entire endeavor. Former broke college student, current broke adult, I can tell you that's on the top of our minds. So what we do is we've got to get the other folks on board. So we've got the Office of Energy Resources. Right now they're offering, I believe, a $2,500, I believe that's a rebate, and the feds are offering a $7,500 tax credit. So right there's about $10,000. Even if you're relatively broke, you know, some of the other models coming down now, the $30,000 and $40,000 range, we're trying to account for that as we go forward. So, you know, one of the things we're trying to do is be ready when the market kind of corrects a little bit. We got more availability and for a better price. So it's a little bit kind of future-proofing where we want to go with that. But great question. I think that's exactly one of the things I was thinking of when I talk about the negativity, the comments, things like that. Sometimes they come from a very intelligent place. So I'm glad you asked.
And just to add on to that before we give a big round of applause, there are enhanced incentives for income-eligible customers, both at the state level and at the federal level through the new Inflation Reduction Act. So when some of these extraordinary pressures in terms of the supply and demand of vehicles and electric vehicles passes, and there's more electric vehicles developed and then entering into the used market, there's going to be programs in place already that will help more people be able to access those. So help is on the way, and it's a positive improvement. A lot of the EV rebate programs are now in their second or third generation and realizing that there's an opportunity to make it more equitable and to increase access. So, but great question, and something that we all need to keep in mind across all of these programs. And I'll also just say a note, if there's, you know, any of these things that you want to advocate for and that you want to see come to Rhode Island, contact your state legislators, because they're the ones that write the budgets and will give the departments the resources they need to make these plans a reality. When you want to think about the sustainability of batteries and the ways that we recycle them and all the work product or the product flow that goes to them, that's another thing that our legislature deals with and can write regulations, laws and regulations about. So contact your legislators, be involved in the regulatory process, and keep in touch with your elected officials regularly. So, but with that, I'd like to thank the panel, especially for staying a little over, but I think there were good questions. And keep coming to the PIER lecture series, right? Thank you.
Energy Fellows, can you stand in front of that blue URI thing, please? Thank you.